you have joined us a little early. Looks like some folks are still logging on. So give it about another 30 seconds or so, and I'll get started. About the folks who registered. Well, you know, we're at a minute past, and we do have quite a lot to cover today. At least have a quorum of those who've registered, so we will go ahead and get started. We just have some administrative items to cover right now anyway, and that can maybe give some other folks a chance to log in. So again, welcome. This is the performance measure reporting updates and review for Second Chance Act grantees, specifically children of incarcerated parents. My name is Erin Rose Feely. I'm a training and technical assistance specialist providing contractor support to OJJDP for all things performance measures, PEs, maybe a little just grants. Again, welcome. We'll go through a few, so kind of get everyone settled and acquainted. We'll get into our content for today. So, as you know, you're using a WebEx platform. The majority of our back and forth today will probably be through the chat box. And I could ask everyone to kind of just take a look at your screen. You should be able to find, you may have to expand it, but there should be a chat box towards the bottom right corner of your screen. Make sure is in that to line that you expand it. It should say everyone. If it doesn't, please expand it. You may have to scroll down that to everyone, because in that way we can all kind of share information back and forth. You will type what your question, your comment, whatever it is there in the chat box, and then you'll hit enter. With that being said, let's do of the chat you have. If you could answer to the question, what is your favorite time of year? And make sure it's set to everyone. There we go. A little floating text box there. Oh, it's not on my side. Fall is my favorite. I was raised in the Northeast. They still say there's nothing like the leaves changing in early fall, especially up in the Northeast. And split there, everyone's at least finding the chat box. And thank you for that answer, and thank you for playing that little game. A few quick announcements. This session today is going to be partially recorded, meaning that we will cut off the recording in and around the time that we're going to do some of the question and answers. There will be 2 spots for question and answer. That is so that we can kind of, have a discussion. Maybe towards the end, we'll take you off mute, let you kind of provide some feedback, ask some additional questions. The recording of this session will be posted online in a few weeks. It does take a few weeks to do some editing and make everything compliant. Web posting. At that point, we will send a copy of the recording along with a copy of the slides from today to everyone who has either registered or attended. If any of you have an older award in FY 17 to 19, you're more than welcome to stay. I just want to call out that much of the information today will be geared towards FY 20 and forward awards, that's 20 and 21. Our performance measure reporting updates for Second Chance Act grantees. Tips for our time today are to make sure that when we're done, you sort of know what the current reporting process is for Second Chance Act grantees, how that's going to play out for both prime and sub grantees, where to find copies of the different pieces of the report, and I'm going to go into exactly what goes into making up a complete performance report today. And towards the end, we do have some additional resources and things to share. We'll see how the time goes with questions and answers, but do know that the resources will be sent out with a copy of these slides later on. Let's dive in really specific content, I kind of want to take a moment just to reset everything and just kind of talk a little bit about how we got to this specific reporting process today. And the one's going to be as of July of 2022. I do want to acknowledge, I think for some of you, there may have been slightly risky reporting timeframe with performance reports. Some of you may have had incorrect due dates originally, showing April as like a quarterly report instead of July. All fixed now, we're all good. Everything will move forward in July. So what I'm going to cover right now is a little bit of kind of how we got to this reporting process. The Excel document that was mentioned in the initial email that was sent out to grant award administrators, which is a workaround until the Just Grant system can fully support both grantee and subrecipient reporting. So for those of you that have an FY21 award, and maybe this is your first Second Chance Act award, this may be new for you. For those who have had an FY20 award, some may be repetitious or a background, but help us all be kind of on the same page together. So especially if you had an older award that was in FY17 to 19, I do want to acknowledge that grant is very different. Performance measures for the FY20 and forward awards are very different. Okay, new system, new award, new measures for all of us. It's a good change, and it's something that we're all going to kind of work through together. Measure updates. Measures that were approved and rolled out in later in 2021. This was the result of a year-long process of redesign to improve the performance measures. And, you know, I definitely understand that the measures that as they exist now feel very different than those in the PMT system, those of you that had passed award. But we went through this collaborative process, and we really feel it produced some consistent and shared measures with shared language across many different OJDP programs. Since most of those old measures kind of described more outcomes, what we're really focusing now with these measures on, is we used to focus on outputs. We're now more focused on outcomes. We're looking to capture data that will better inform decision making and, you know, support federal guidelines that are out there around performance measures, where that performance measures are telling their program story, that they're looking at program progress, not just, you know, checking a box and looking at the basic. So, understanding though that we have reached a little bit of a crossroads with having new and better performance measures balanced against some of the functionality that is still being worked on within Just Grants. So that's kind of where we are at the moment, and that's how we got to the reporting process the Second Chance Grants Act grantees have today. Measures, and you may have heard this quite a bit and have attended some of our other sessions. We talk about supporting the mission of OJDP, and I wanted to just put that up on the screen because it is an important one, someplace that I look to and start whenever I'm beginning a new project myself. And you know, the mission is important for several reasons, but performance measures, performance management, that's one of the key ways you support success. Performance measures, and we use the definition that's on the screen now. It comes from OJP, or the Office of Justice Programs. So in part, measures and measurement is the particular collection of data to assess whether the correct processes are being performed and desired results are being achieved. As you know them now, are and will continue to be a combination of both qualitative, those are kind of the narrative questions that you're used to, as well as the quantitative, which is really kind of more that hard data, the numbers format. As well, are an excellent way really for you to know how your grant and your program is progressing towards meeting those goals and objectives that you outlined in your proposal. And again, remember that OJGDP does use performance measures from all Second Chance Act grantees rolled up or aggregated together. So you every day, and it can feel like you're getting kind of stuck in those everyday reports, but when it is all pulled together, the hard work that you put in every day is what gives our leadership confidence when they're answering data requests to Congress, to the public, or for the president's budget. Knowledge of your program, aligned with performance measurement, that's really what helps create the reliability, reporting, and data analysis. So Dawn, take a minute and say thank you. Again, I know I've said it a couple of times now that this is a new process. This is a newer performance measures. But I want to acknowledge that you're out there doing the hard work every day, that you have already spent time and money on data collection. And we've seen questions coming through at the help desk and appreciate those. Please keep them coming. You know, and I also do want to ask for a bit of grace as we move forward with this particular Excel workaround and your continued open and honest communication. Ask questions early and often. With the help desk, let us know, can we set up a call to talk about your specific report and your program? We so appreciate the work that you're doing every day to support youth and their families, that we want to be here to make the performance reporting process as good as possible. With that, let us dive a bit more into the details. I mentioned, while we're awaiting Just Grants to be able to launch subrecipient data collection functionality, to use an Excel document to capture some of the key performance measures. This Excel document is a temporary solution, and just so you know, we definitely plan additional outreach, training, office hours, whenever there is full functionality in Just Grants to support all of that data collection. You'll definitely be hearing more from us in the future. As we talked about, JP went through a year-long process to create the performance measures that you're reporting on right now, and we're excited to hear your feedback. So in this particular section, what we're going to do is an overview of the main pieces or parts that make up a performance report. Stop and take some questions. Then we're going to talk about the details of the itself, and one of the things I will go over is how you can find a copy of the Excel sheet in Just Grants. So for those of you on the phone who maybe have grant award administrator permissions in Just Grants, that little screenshot there on the right hopefully might look familiar. If it doesn't, it will the next time you log in. It's just, you're not meant to have to read the whole thing again. It's just a bit of a visual reference. And to give you an idea of within the performance report or PR, when there are going to be three main pieces that make up a complete performance report. The three main pieces are report or narrative questions. Many of you, most of you, especially if you have an FY20 award, you should be very familiar. These are the same questions that you've already answered. They're going to continue to be there. They are labeled, or they show up, as you can see in Just Grants, as P and Q. Question set. This is going to be new in July of 2022. It's going to be labeled, that's that number 2. It's just going to say Sec Chance Parent. And I'll go over what's in that question set. It's very short. There's only 2 or 3 questions, and there's going to be a place to find a copy of the Excel document. Document itself. Copies were sent out to whoever the grant award administrator is on file, not the alternate award administrator. So you may need to check with someone on your team to get a copy. You can also get a copy from, as I said, from the PMT help desk. And I will post that contact information in chat. So the Excel document, which I said we'll go into a bit later, portion of the larger list of performance measures, which we hope that you will continue to collect data on. I also do want to point out that number 3, that attachments piece there with the paperclip icon, that can take more than one attachment. So if you have other items that you want to share with your grant manager as part of the performance report, the Excel needs to go there, but you can upload other documents as well. The narrative or PNQ question set that you will see in Just Grants. So this is a place where you're going to talk about your deliverables. You're going to talk about what's going on, the work of the program. You report in January, as I mentioned, for some people, the way the due date was set up had to be changed. So when it was changed from April, it was changed to July. So there was a kind of like a missing report in there. So for some of you, there may be an opportunity here to be talking about 9 months of information. So, but some of that information just may be what was kind of going on more towards the early part of the award. And for many people, that may be budgets were still being finalized. You're waiting for OCFO approval. And that's kind of the place to sort of write out those pieces of it. You can, and I would recommend, I used to do this when I was a grantee, is to kind of prep your answers to those narrative questions ahead of time. And you can actually copy and paste them in. I would advise, though, to make sure that you're doing that in plain text so that you don't end up with any error messages. Again, these should be the questions that you've already seen before, but we do have copies of the questions online, and I am putting a link to those progress report narrative questions in the chat right now. This second piece, this was number 2 on that list above, going to be the new question set that you should see right now in Just Grants, but that will be due in July of 2022. And this, again, this is just a small visual reference just to give you the idea that it's really just kind of 3 main pages. The first page is just text. It's a welcome you have for doing the performance measures. Quote page 2, what I have on the screen. It's very simple questions. The last reporting period, to which the majority of folks will put no. The question is, was there grant activity during this reporting period? You're going to want to put yes, and then you will move on. You will notice that you do have to answer both questions. If there's a little asterisk or star next to a question, that does mean it's required, and you do have to put in an answer. So this is that third page that you're going to see in that new question set. Not actually a question so much, but this, based on the way Just Grants is functioning, this is the simplest way that we found to have a copy of the Excel document available that you can download from Just Grants. You don't have to go searching through your email or contact the help desk. What you'll see is some instructions, and then you'll see a little question mark. Mine is highlighted here just to point it out. You will see that little question mark there. Once you click on the question mark, the download will begin, and the email will kind of pop up for you, and it should pop up either in a pop-up box or maybe towards the bottom left-hand side of your screen. That's how you can get a copy to begin to fill out. So in the Excel document, as we've mentioned, there was some back and forth with report due dates. Please do keep the data that you are putting into that Excel document 6 months worth of data. So I wanted to just kind of step back and acknowledge that there may be a longer time frame of work that I be talking about potentially in your narrative questions, but please do keep Excel to 6 months of whatever data you have that covers January to June of 2022. That piece number 3 that we were talking about in the little snapshot I had of the inside of Just Grants, and this is where you're gonna, after you've downloaded a copy, then you will then have to upload it. Attachments, you've got to look for that paperclip icon on that first page of the PR, the performance report. I'll stop here for a second. So let's take some time now to talk specifically about some tips and tricks for when you're using the Excel document. Notice when you download a copy or you've opened it as an attachment from email that this Excel document is being used by both second chance incarcerated parents as well as reentry. So are pretty much the same, but your question and definitions document, the numbers are slightly different. So once you've opened the Excel, if I could ask you to look for that yellow highlighted box, the drop down, make sure you've got your correct award chosen, because if you need to look back at your question and definitions document for some additional guidance, having the correct question numbers will definitely be helpful. And there are going to be some smaller looking screenshots as we're going through. I don't necessarily have to read all the text in the screenshots. They're there as a visual reference. Things I do want to note is that there is a full list of performance measures on the question and definitions document. We are just focusing on a few key performance measures in the Excel document. So when you're seeing number of individuals, that is going to be youth, adults, ages 0 to 24. That's kind of who we're focusing on. Though it's in the full list of the measures on the Excel document, we're not at this point looking for parents or additional family members. I have mentioned the definition and questions document a few times. Visual reference of it there on the left-hand side of your screen. This is the full list of the performance measures along with some definitions or additional guidance. And I will post an online link to this just in case you don't have a copy. All right. And questions document, that kind of center column you can use for guides. And then as I said, that in that first column with the question numbers, that's what will align to your Excel document. So when you go to begin your data entry, as I said, this is really kind of set up, and you'll see that the name of the document does say subgrantees. That's kind of where it's sort of headed, but we do also want to recognize that you as the prime or primary grantee in many cases may also be doing direct service. So you can put your direct service activities on this Excel document as well. Again, my very small screenshot just to give you an idea of kind of what it looks like. You can put your agency name there. I believe that's column B. Get over to that brief description column. What you can do is just indicate that you are the main or primary grantee and then kind of keep going from there. I do also want to acknowledge that what we've heard is through the help desk and through your grant managers is there are some awards that are not providing direct service. They may be more of an assessment or an evaluation award, and it's fine too. Encourage, if you could please, to use the Excel documents Again, you can just use that brief description column there to just indicate that there's no direct service, evaluation, you're in the IRB phase, kind of, like whatever that is. So this is just an example. You don't have to say these exact words, but just kind of something to give us an idea of the direction that your award is headed if it's not direct service. So if any of you attended the session that we had, I think a week or two ago, I did a very large performance measure overview, and we talked about key performance measures, and we had a lot of different folks from different programs on. One of the things we talked about were validations, or ways to kind of check your data before you complete your performance report. We went over it in a lot of detail. I'm going to go over it kind of briefly here in a couple of slides to give you kind of a second chance at specific examples. So when we say key performance measures, specifically here we're looking at individuals served. So that's going to be youth served, young adults. And what you're going to do is you really want to pay attention to what you are reporting in the first few columns, and you'll look at them. You for specifically, it's going to be columns P through U. You're going to add up what you put as total columns, and then use that total to check against other performance measures. So in this case, we've got 20 individuals served. Next is, as we move on to the other performance measures, for example, individuals who were detained, what we want to do is we want to say, okay, individuals were detained, is that less than or equal to some of the performance measures, of key performance measures. So in this case, the checkbox is 10, less than are 20. Incorrect flag for you would be to say, so basically saying you have more individuals who were detained who actually received services in that report. So to double check your data collection for one of those, either you missed a few folks who had received services, or you may want to look at how you're calculating number of individuals detained. About the Excel document, there are instructions that will pop up when you go to click on or hover over certain cells. That's going to be particularly relevant when you're looking at things like the award number. Because the format of the award number for FY20 and 21 is so different, we had to put it in two different columns. So you're not expected to, to have a 20 and a 21 award number. You're going to have one or the other. It is a very specific format. So if you get that pop-up box that we have there on the right-hand side of the screen, it just means that you need to go in and make sure that the dashes are in the correct place. The main details I can think of for the Excel document, so we can again open it up to general questions. Your reporting schedules semi-annually, so due dates are going to be January 30th and July 30th. Fully understand that there are 31 days in the month. The due date is always going to be the 30th. These links will be clickable, as I said, in the copy of the slides that I send out. And if you want anything here too, I can always put that in the chat. These are some of, we do have things that are posted on the website around past trainings for the performance measures from last year. I think I put a link to the progress report or narrative questions in the chat previously. And if you have resources that are out there on the website, if you have an older FY17 to 19. And then, for those of you who have asked this particular question or any others, particularly on any performance measures that may not be listed on the Excel sheet, but you're continuing to collect data on, as I mentioned, you can reach out to the help desk. Our sessions usually around 30 minutes, but we can always go longer if that's what's helpful. Love to have multiple people from a team attend, anyone who's going to be contributing to data collection. I do want to just kind of populate this slide as well, just to kind of draw out the fact that we do have two different help desks. I understand, again, that that's confusing. Myself, my team, my help desk, we really will focus on the measures, the Excel sheet, why something says what it says. For example, today, what you would go to the Just Grants service desk with, permissions. Can the alternate award administrator upload things? How do you change a grant award administrator name? Those are, or if you receive an error message directly in Just Grants, and those are going to be kind of all the technical issues that you're going to go to the Just Grants team with. Again, here's our contact information. This is the Just Grants contact information. And I put some of these links in the chat already. Submitting a performance report checklist, that can be helpful as well once you've got all those three pieces into Just Grants. Up to the rest of my team here on the phone, anything I have missed, anything that you'd like to provide clarification on? Thinking, one thing that I need from you, if there's something that you learned today that you thought was new and interesting that you're going to be using, what about that? I also would love to know what you would change about this training or additional topics of trainings that you would love to see. If you would be willing to kind of feedback you have in the chat. Our team will stay on the phone maybe about another 5–10 minutes or so. Again, a lot of information was shared. I will release you to get back to your day. If that's what you need to do, we'll kind of hang out for a few more minutes. But if you need to go, thank you for attending, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.